Today's daf is daf Pei Vav, and we're going to begin with Shol Rav Masya ben Cherich. So let's see if we can find the place. It's approximately 20 lines down from the top of the Amud, and the first word in the line is Lishe'enam. Shal Rabbi Masya ben Charash es Rabbi Loza ben Azariah Baromi. Shamati arba chiluke kapara shahaya Rabbi Shmuel Dorish. So there's a face-to-face meeting here between Rabbi Masya and Rabbi Loza ben Azariah. It tells you even where it took place. And Rabbi Masya says, I heard something general in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, and I need you to fill in the details. What I heard was that there are 4 chiluke kapara, which means, as Rashi explains it, there's an avera that needs 1 kapara, or shall we say category of averas, another category of averas that needs another kapara. So we have 4 mechaprim that correspond to 4 different categories of averas. That's what I heard. More than that, I didn't hear. I don't know which are the 4 categories of mechaprim, which are the corresponding 4 categories of averas. Shahoy Rabbi Shmuel Dorish. Amar lo, Rabbi Loza ben Azariah says to Rabbi Masya, you should know that there's a little bit of a fault in the transmission. It's not 4 chiluke kapara, but rather shloshahem. In other words, if you're talking about chiluk, then chiluk means that in one category of avera, I need a certain mechaper, and in another category of avera, I don't need that mechaper, I need a different mechaper, then you're making a mistake, shlochaim. There are only 3 different mechaprim that are limited and restricted to their particular corresponding categories. But tshuva should be removed from your list of chiluk. Why? Because in kol echad v'echad, every single category of sin must require tshuva, and there's no kapara without tshuva. So if you're setting up chiluk and you're telling me that these mechaprim are restricted, are limited to those averos, then there are only 3 mechaprim that are limited to their category of averos, but tshuva is not limited because tshuva is a requirement in each one of these categories. And what that means here is that according to Rabbi Shmuel, even the lowest category, meaning the lightest in the hierarchy of severity, that's called chayvei esei, even those have no kapara without tshuva. So tshuva takes you from the bottom all the way to the top, from the least severe to the most severe, and there's no category of avera at all that can guarantee with its mechaper a complete kapara without tshuva. In the absence of tshuva, there ain't no such thing as kapara. Now, this principle has to be taken into advisement with regard to the sheet of Rebbe, because Rebbe seems to assume that Yoma Kippurim is mechaper without tshuva. But this brisa of Rabbi Shmuel does not reflect the sheet of Rebbe. Now we go through the 3 chiluke kapara, and we're going to go through all the categories of sins and see, again, tshuva is going to be required in each of the 4 categories, but in 3 out of the 4 categories, when we go beyond chayvei esei, up the ladder to the more severe, we're not going to suffice with tshuva. Tshuva alone cannot clinch kapara. We'll need another mechaper. Aval esei v'shav. If he violates an essay and he does tshuva, eino zaz misham ad shemochlim lo. He doesn't have to move from the spot, and he is guaranteed a mechila without having to do anything else. So, for example, if he didn't wear tzitzis on a beged Chaltalit Kamfis, he didn't take the lulav. Then he does tshuva. It's got to be sincere tshuva, obviously. And then he gains mechila without having to do any other mechaper. And we'll see how we derive this in just a second. But the main point here is that we're dealing with mechila. And I'm not sure that mechila is exactly the same as kapara. Mechila means that God is mochel, so to speak. When you sin, then you owe God an obligation, a debt, because there's no sin without punishment. And God says, I'm willing to waive the debt as if you were punished, and that's called mechila, if you did tshuva. It could be that kapara might be something more than just mechila. Maybe kapara affects a change in the spiritual makeup of the soul, and for that, it's not enough just to ask Hashem for mechila. Your tshuva might have to be on a more intense level. But in any event, tshuva will certainly guarantee mechila and maybe even kapara if it's a very severe, a very sincere tshuva in the case of Chai V'Yaseh. And how do we know this? Shenemar, Pasuk in Yirmiyah, Shuvu banim shovavim, erpa mishuvo seichem. It sounds like immediately after you do tshuva, even though you were shovavim, shovavim means in this context that you rebelled against me, God promises that he will be mechaper immediately. And what that means is that shuvu banim, tshuva, in and of itself is enough to clinch kapara. Now, we don't know from this pasuk which category of sins we're dealing with. It just says banim shovavim. But since we're going to see from each pasuk, as we go higher and higher on the list of mechaprim and the severity of the sin, it's logical to assume that if the Torah in this pasuk in Yirmiyah is telling me that tshuva alone is enough, then we go to the lowest level of sin, and that's going to be Chai V'Yaseh. That's the kal, that's the most lenient of all the four. Now we go on to the next level, and we're going to find a pasuk to teach us that we need Yoma Kippurim, which means that tshuva is not enough. So we're going to go up the ladder in severity from Chai V'Yaseh to the next level. What's the next level? More intense. Avar alosaseh, the asa tshuva. He violated a losaseh, not just an essay, and that's a severe act of rebellion. It's not just that he passively did not take the lulav, but he actively ate something that's asur. And here the pasuk is going to tell me that it's not enough to do tshuva. Tshuva tola, it's true that tshuva takes me on the way towards kapara. Tola means it's suspended, but it is made some progress. And the Mefarshim say it will protect me from Yisurim, but it will not clinch kapara. The Yoma Kippur Mechap. Now, how do we know that there's another category of sin where tshuva alone is not sufficient? Shenemar, regarding Yom Kippur, in Parshas Achremos, the Torah says, Ki b'yom hazeh yechaper aleichem l'tayer eschem mikol chatoseichem. So it means that the Samavera that requires the kapar of Yom Kippurim. So it means that tshuva is not enough. Tshuva might protect him from severe physical suffering, but nevertheless it won't bring him kapara because you're on a higher level of a more serious avera. And we're going to assume that if we go up one level from essay, where the Torah says shuvu banim shovim, and it's enough that you did tshuva, going to one level you need not just tshuva but the kapara of Yom Kippurim, that's going to be a losas. Now we're not sure what kind of a losas we're dealing with. And in the previous sugya, which Hashem will learn, there are many different types of losases. There's a losase hanitakli essay that you could fix up with an essay. And then there's a losase that's on the level of Lotisa Shem Hashem Lashav, and then there's a Los Haseh that is not as severe as Lotisa, but yet it's a violation that generates Malchus. There are many different categories of Los Haseh. We're not sure at this point, until we get to the Sugya, exactly what Los Haseh we're dealing with. Now we're going to prove from another pasuk that we need another Machaper, and that's going to be Isurim, physical suffering. And we're going to jack it up to another level, a more severe level of Avera. And that's of our Al-Krisos Umisos Bezdin. It's not a regular lav that generates Malchus, but it's a lav sheish bo kares, or worse, it's a lav sheish bo misa. Asa tshuva, not enough. Tshuva v'yom kippurim, not enough. That's called Tolan. Tolan means, as we saw before, there's some sort of temporary protection. Here it's not going to be protection from Yisurim, because if all he had was Tshuva and Yom Kippurim and these severe violations, that's not going to protect him from Yisurim. He's going to need Yisurim, but it will protect him from death. That's how Rashi learns. But then Yisurim Memarkin. Now, what does the word Memarkin mean? So I'm going to quote to you the Rambam. The Rambam holds that Miruk is called Hashlomas HaPu'ula. Whenever you do an action and you need to finish the action and complete its goal, that's called Miruk. So the goal here is to achieve Kapara, and that depends upon Yisurim. Without Yisurim, there won't be Kapara for these Averos. And that's called Memarkin. Now, there's a very important comment here of the Minchas Chinuch. And he writes that Rabbi Shmuel disagrees with our Mishnah. According to our Mishnah, Chayve Krisus, Chayve Mitzvos Bezdin are all included under Chayve Lavin. And therefore, Tshuva and Yom Kippurim alone will be Machaper. You don't need Yisurim. The Chiddush of Rabbi Shmuel, in which he disagrees with our Mishnah, is that for these severe Chayve Lavim, these are the Chamuros of Kares and Mitzvos Bezdin, it's not enough that you did Tshuva and you experienced the Kapar of Yom Kippurim. In addition, you need to suffer Yisurim. Shenemar, Pasuk in Tehillim, Ufakadati b'shevet tish'am u'b'negoyim avonam. And Pakadati b'shevet means that God will mete out punishment with a corporeal punishment with a shevet. A shevet is a rod. And b'negoyim avonam. And they'll suffer negoyim because of their sins. So we see that there's an avera that requires suffering. And that's going to be on the list, the totem pole, the hierarchy of averas of more chamura, and that's the avera chamura of kares and mitzvos bezdin. Now we're up to the last level of chiluke kapara, and that means that tshuva, Yom Kippurim, and Yisurim are not enough. We need nevuch misa. Now, what is the most severe avera that goes beyond even chayve mitzvos bezdin? That's chil Hashem biyado. Now we're going to have a whole sugya about chil Hashem. Rashi's shita is that this whole sugya revolves around one principle. That's called chote umachti acherim. You'll see this on Rashi about 12 lines, 15 lines down from the top of the page. It's bad enough when you sin, but it's worse when your sin has an impact on others who imitate you and follow in your footsteps. So you cause them to do sin. And in such a case, ein lo kach b'tshuva litlos Yom Kippurim lechaper v'lo yisurim lemarek ela kulam tolim umisa merakis. So tshuva is not enough to protect him during this period of time until he gets to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur together with tshuva is not enough to protect him from Misa. And even Yisurim is not enough to protect him from Misa, but he needs Kulam Tolim, all the above. He needs Tshuva, Yoma Kippurim, Yisurim, and now Misa, which is going to clinch the Kapara. Shenemar, how do we know this? Poskin Yeshaya, V'nigla bi'oznei Hashem tzvakos, im yechubar avon hazeh lochem ad temusim. And with regard to this sin, which is not specified in the pasuk, God says there won't be any kapara until temusan, ad temusan, until misa. And this is what Yeshayahu Hanavi says, bi'oznai, nigla bi'oznai. I heard this from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there won't be a kapara for the Avon until they die. So there must be an Avera, which the kapara requires Misa. And it's logical that that would be the most severe of all Averas on the top of the protocol, and that's going to be Chil Hashem, which is Chamur Mikulam. And now the Gemara goes into an entire sugya. Each Amora has his own story to tell about what is Chil Hashem. Hechi Dami Chil Hashem. Amar Rav. Rav says, Kigon Ana. He doesn't mean to say that he actually did what he's going to describe now, but it means Kigon Ana, a person who is looked up to as a leader. The standards and the demands are higher, and that's reflective of his high status because people are going to emulate him. Ishkilva bisra mitabacha, and he gives one example. You can have any example where a person goes in to buy merchandise. In this case, he went into the butchery to buy meat, and he buys the meat without paying for it. I didn't pay for it immediately on the spot. And what's going to happen? People will suspect me of stealing. Not only that, even the butcher himself thinks I'm a thief because I didn't pay him. And he's going to learn from me, Rashi says, Lamad Mimeni, Rashi says, Lios Mizalzel Begeza. If this is the way Rav or somebody on that level behaves, then I'm going to imitate that behavior. Rabbi Lo Shanu. Rabbi says that this is not an absolute rule that in all circumstances you have to pay immediately. That only applies the Asrei Delo Tavi. In other words, if I anticipate that the proprietor, vendor, whatever it might be, who's selling his merchandise, is going to send me a bill, then I don't have to pay before he sends me the bill. But if it's Bi'asra Delo Tavi, where he doesn't come knocking on my door and say, here's the bill, pay me up, he waits for me to pay, and he relies on me that I'll pay immediately in good time, and I don't pay, that's called Chil Hashem. Aval Bi'asra de Tavi, when it's acceptable in that location, that locality, that you don't pay until they send you the bill, as I said, meaning they are tovea you. Hey, buddy, this is what you ate. This is the price. Pay me. In such a case, less lamba. Why? Because you haven't yet presented me with the bill, and you're giving me a little bit leeway, and I'm not stealing you from you. I'm just waiting for you to send me the bill. Amar Avina, Umasa Machasi, you should know about my city, my local city, Asra de Tavihu. This is a place where the butchers are tovea, they demand payment. And therefore there's no Chil Hashem if before the demand for payment you delayed payment. Abaye, and now we learn a story about Abaye and how he was very careful to avoid Chil Hashem. He was afraid that if two people owned a geschäft in partnership, if he pays one of them, then lest the other one suspect him that he didn't pay. So let's say the basar was selling at the price of one zuz, and it was being sold by shutfin. What did Abai do? Yoiv zuzalahai, the zuzalahai. Again, he only owes a zuz, but he gave a zuz to each one of the partners, so no partner could suspect him of cheating, of geza. Then Makarvlu Gabi Adodi, he gathered together the two partners, the Ovid Chushbana, and he said, let's make a cheshbon. So one in front of the other said, I receive from you a zuz, and the sum total is 2 zuzim, so he gets a rebate on 1 zuz. In this way, he guarantees that no one will suspect him and there's no chil Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, what's chil Hashem? Could go now, somebody like me. Again, it's not he himself, but somebody like me. The Masgena, I'm walking Daled Amos below Torah u below Tefillin. So the Mefarshim say that Rabbi Yochanan, towards the end of his life, got weak, and he was not capable of wearing his tefillin constantly, and people would know that he was weak, so that was not a chil Hashem. But if somebody like me, on the level of a leader of Israel, a tzaddik, and he's not weak, why is he wearing tefillin? Others will imitate him. Now, again, this really reflects back in the day that people didn't even walk 4 amos without tefillin. Today, we put on tefillin for chakras and get ended. And what does it mean below Torah? A person should be constantly thinking of Torah. The Rambam apparently understood that this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, not walking 4 amos without Torah, refers to what's called Keser Torah. Now, Keser Torah is not a physical crown that you wear, but once you're imbued with the status of a mukhtar b'Keser Torah, then you are constantly dovek b'Torah. The Rambam says, "Lo yasiach daito l'dvar macherim." He's not distracted from his learning. And in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, hopefully everybody understood, all the spectators, that he was weak and he was older, and that's why he wasn't learning. But if there was no explanation and justification for why he's not learning, that would constitute a chil Hashem. He says in the footnote here, in the name of Tosefes Yom Kippur, Pashat Shel Rabbi Yochanan Atzmo Lo Haya Avon Shel Chil Hashem. Rabbi Yochanan did not violate; he wasn't guilty of chil Hashem. Everybody knew he was onus. V'lo haya yochol lo leches in tefillin v'torah. Umasha Omer could go now. No, kavanasa li also shil yilmad mimenu lo leches daled amos below Torah tefillah v'elo chulsha v'elo mechush kei varosh hu yichal es Hashem, because they will imitate him. Yitzchak the Bei Rabbi Yanai Omar, Yitzchak, who is in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yanai, he would ask the question, what's chil Hashem? Kol shachaverav misbaishim machmash muasa. He has a very bad reputation. And he does all sorts of things and people imitate him. That's called chil Hashem. And the main emphasis here is Shem Rasha Yotzalov Vilomdim Mimenu Lachto. And people imitate him and they learn from him how to sin. The Rosh writes that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, again, there's a question of what the Girsa is, but anyway, he has Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is coming to explain. I'm sorry, the next statement of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is coming to explain what was a kol shechaver misbaishim machmash muaso. And Omer Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak Gigon Deka Amri Inchi, people say about him, Sharole More Leplanya, may the Almighty who created man be mochel him because he's involved in these kinds of activities. He really needs a mechila from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's chil Hashem. And here we have 2 opinions in the Achronim about what's going on. According to one opinion, Rav was of the opinion that chil Hashem is dafka when people learn from him to violate a law. And Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, defines chil Hashem as when people will learn from him even to violate an essay. However, another opinion is that even if he did not do any avera, but people suspect him, that already is chil Hashem. Kol she'echad bo lahachmir yoser me'akodim. And each shita is now coming to be more machmir on what constitutes chil Hashem. Abaya Omar chil Hashem is kiddushani, like we learned in a brisa. V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, and the word es in this pasuk is superfluous to teach us. V'ahavta es mean it's not enough that you love God, but shehei shem shamayim es havel yodcha, that the name of God should be beloved to your friend through your actions, that whatever you do, your behavior will bring others to love Hashem. And what does that mean? Sheikore v'shona, he should learn Torah Shebechsav, and then review and study Torah Shebal Peh, the Mishnah. U'meshamish Talmidei Chachamim, he should learn from a Talmud Chacham and imitate his ways. Yeh maso masonu b'nachas mabrios, when he deals with other people, he doesn't get angry. Brios omroso. What are the average person? What is he describing? Well, how does he describe such a person? Ashrei aviv shalimno Torah. How fortunate is his father that he had the chus to teach Torah to such a beautiful specimen. Ashrei rabo shalimno Torah. And so too his Rebbe is so praiseworthy because he raised such a Talmud and trained him. But oy lehem lebriot shalom du Torah. Now we say about those who didn't study Torah, oy lehem, woe to them. Ploni shalom Torah re'u kama noim drachav, kama misukonim maisa. When they say about Ploni, he studied Torah, look how beautiful his actions are. Everything is misukonim, is absolutely ideal. And all his bein adam le'makom and bein adam le'chavero are mitukonim, are perfect. All of HaKosav Omer, if that's what the people are saying about him, then Yeshayahu Navi says, Vayomer li avdi ato Yisrael asher b'cha es poer. God says, I'm glorified through your service. And when God is glorified, it's indicative of the fact that God is beloved. Aval. Now we go through the exact opposite. He doesn't have honest to goodness dealings, especially in business dealings. The ein diburo benachas imabrios, and he gets angry at people. He has altercations with people. Is mabrios omravov oilo lebloni shalom Torah oilo love shalim del Torah oilo leravo shalim del Torah. Ploni shalom Torah ukam meku kolim ma'asav kam mechu orim jochov. All of HaKosav Omer, the pasuk says in Yechezkel about the Jews that are sent out to Golus, what a chil Hashem it is. Ve'amar lehem am Hashem eleh ume'artzo yotzo. This is the Am Hashem. This is the nation of God. They pollute the land of Israel, and therefore God kicks them out of the land and sends them into exile. That's the greatest chil Hashem. When the nations of the world say that, look, the Jews are coming into our land, they've been alienated and exiled from their land. Oh, their God apparently can't even save them and protect them from exile. That's the greatest chil Hashem, and that's what Yechezkel Navi is speaking about. Omar Rabbi Chama Reb Chanina Gedola Tshuva Shemevia Refuos La'olam. And the commentaries say that if one person does tshuva, he already brings refuah for all cholim in the world. Shenemar arpa mishuvasam oavem nidava. I will be soleach on the fact that they rebelled against you. Oevosam b'nidavas libi. And I love them from the bottom of my heart. And with darshaning the word erpa, kipshuto, erpa means that through this person who did tshuva, there will be refuah brought to the entire world. And there are those who ask, but the lashon of erpa is a lashon mechila. And how do we know that this will be a refuah for the entire world. So the Maharsha says that it says Mishu Vasan in the pasuk, and it means that something is left over, meaning not everyone did tshuva, and yet there is slicha because of that individual who did tshuva. It's an absolutely amazing concept that one person's tshuva could have such an impact. Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina Rami. There's a steer in two psukim. Ksiv, it says in Yirmiyahu, Shuvu Banim Shovavim. And Shovavim means Meikara Shovim Atem. That even when you began to sin and you did tshuva, then you're not called a chote anymore. You're called a shove. In other words, we're going to consider it as if you acted as a child. Shovim is a kind of activity that's common or that reflects childishness or shtus, stupidity. That's what shovim means. You know, these kind of, rebellious, childish, immature people, which means you're not a chote. So it seems that tshuva operates even retroactively to remove your status as a chote. Now you're called shovim. But ksiv, the next part of the pasuk says, Erpa mishuv v'seichem. Mishuv v'seichem implies that there's no mechila until this point. It's mishuv v'seichem, from the moment that you did tshuva and on, which is called mikan ulahava. Like the case of Balmum, people still remember that he used to limp, but now he's Baruch Hashem walking. But, the original status is not removed retroactively. And Rabbi Chama says, Lo kasha. How do we reconcile this apparent contradiction? Kan, in the pasuk of Shuvu Banim Shovavim, that's called Shuva Me'ava. And in the case of a Tshuva Me'ava, the Tshuva is Oker, the Chet L'mafreya retroactively. But Kan, when it says Erpa Mishuv Seichem, that's a lower level of Tshuva, which is called Tshuva Miyira. It's not out of love of God, just he's afraid. He is desperate because he knows that he's going to suffer divine punishment. That level of tshuva is only mikan ulahaba. It is not oker the chet l'mafreya. Rabbi Yehuda Rami has a different contradiction. Ksiv, it says there in Yirmiyahu, shuvu banim shovim erpa mishuvo seichem. And from the fact that it's called banim, it seems that about tshuva is called banim. He's the son of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ksiv. But the next pasuk says, Ki anochi ba'alti bachem, and the word ba'alti here is miloshin srara, meaning I lorded over you. V'lakachti eschem echad me'ir ushnai mi mishpacha. It sounds like the Baal Tshuva is called an eved, because when we talk about a loshin srara like ba'alti, lording it over it, it means that he's lording over those who did tshuva that are only avodim. They only reach the level of avodim. So what are we after tshuva? Are we banim or avodim? And the answer is lo kasher kan mi'ava o miyira v'kan al yidei yisurim. So according to the thesis of Rabbi Yehuda, you can have and achieve through your tshuva level of banim if you are choser b'tshuva either me'ava or b'yira. However, the pasuk that refers to the status of the Baal Tshuva as an eved, that means he didn't do tshuva because of his own motivation, but somehow the yisurim, the punishment, forced him to do tshuva. And the Maharsha has a long, long discussion here about this concept of al yidei yisurim and tshuva me'ava, tshuva me'yira. How great is tshuva? It reaches all the way up to the throne, the kisei hakavod. Shenemar, in other words, it comes in front of the Shechina, and the pasuk says in Hosea, "Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha." It doesn't say El Hashem Elokecha, but ad Hashem Elokecha, meaning that the tshuva goes all the way to Hashem Elokecha.